Good morning. Thank you to be here. My presentation aims to understand the political intention behind the cultural project of the anti-Nazi Die Zone, a German journal published in 1933-34 in Paris. I also try to assess the extent to which it was able to reach a cultural and political community or directly create one for itself. The first three issues of Die Zone is undated, and even if we try to date them based on the events which the issues mention or comment on, we are still left with a relatively large time window. It can therefore only be safely stated that the first three issues were published in 1933, and as you can see in my tiny pink datasheet, subsequent issues appeared in December 1933 and January, March, and May 1934. Although the journal should have been published monthly, according to the apparent editorial intention, certain issues were omitted or postponed. This fact usually indicates a lack of financial stability. The cultural profile of the magazine became clear to any unsuspecting reader from the main topics indicated on the front page, such as German politics, literature, science, theater, music, and radio. The mission statement of Die Zone, to use a business flavor term, is from the last page, and it reads something like this. Die Zone is not a newspaper for emigrants, but a platform for free thinkers who want to capture and influence the zeitgeist of the time. And here, in fact, articulates the dilemma of any newspaper written in a language other than the official language of the country of its activity. Die Zone's decision to publish solely in German strongly delimits the potential target audience, and just as the target audience, namely the German speakers in France, the newspaper finds itself also in a minority position. And Die Zone clearly wants to challenge this position by trying to extend its scope by referring to itself as a free-thinking platform. Moreover, in the case of Die Zone, another typical contradiction, namely the question of representation, or, to put it in other way, the overlap, or rather the lack of overlap between the target audience and the real readership, comes inevitably also in play. We may have some suspicions, obviously, as to whether it were really the free thinkers all around the world that subscribed to Die Zone, I want to say simply. But we will come back to this question later on. But now, let's see the origin of the name. This is explained in an editorial in the third issue by one of the two editors, Emil Szittya, who defined at the same time Die Zone's political agenda. Unfortunately, the paths of today's Kulturkampf do not run in a straight line, but are forced to bend left and right to find their way to the German people. This is why we are trying to express our views to Germany from here, from Paris. Besides the sick Germany, there are 20 million Germans who are not yet sick, who are not yet miserable. We want to prevent these Germans living abroad from becoming sick, and we are striving to create a zone from which true German culture can flourish worldwide. It is worth drawing attention to the crisis of ideas. If even one intelligent word out of millions of voices from abroad reaches Germany and makes an impact, it will keep Germany on life support until it recovers. This program clearly targets the German diaspora and excludes the possibility of distribution in Germany. Yes. The role of the editors is always key when it comes to periodicals, since they tremendously rely on the editor's network. Besides, the editor's personal projects as writers, art critics, and visual artists are clearly reflected in the periodical itself. Even more so in the case of Die Zone, since we are talking about a smaller enterprise, which is practically inseparable from the political orientation and the personal finances of Emil Szittya and Paul Rustadt. Of the two, Emil Szittya is the dominant figure, as Rustadt first published in the third issue and became editor from the fourth onwards. Unfortunately, unlike Szittya, we don't know much about him, as he is not listed in the typical sources where emigrants in France can generally be found, and in which, as we shall see shortly, Szittya is effectively present. Here are listed all of his own works. There are only two of them. One is a special issue of Die Zone on Jaurès, and the other is entitled Banlieue, Story from the Parisian Suburbs, published also by Die Zone. Not only was Szittya the editor-in-chief, but he also appears as an author under several pseudonyms in the paper, such as Nordinger, PR, Namenloser, Dr. Sauerbrot, Karl Stammer. These are just the ones that I'm sure cover Szittya, judging by the subject or the style of the articles, but a thorough critical reading would probably expand this list. In parentheses, I would add that it has also occurred to me that Rustadt is the same as Szittya at one point, since he is not listed in the relevant repertories and bibliographies, but there is a letter from him in Szittya's collected correspondence, which makes it likely that he was a real separate person. The inclusion of the same authors under several pseudonyms in order to boost a bit the list of contributors, as well as the generous display of metropolises on the front page, such as Paris, London, New York, as you can see, which also suggests a network of foreign correspondents were all common practices for avant-garde newspapers to increase their importance, their capital of contact, and internationality. And Szittya certainly had experience in this matter. In 1911, he edited the German-French bilingual Neue Menschen, Les Hommes Nouveaux, with Blaise Cendrars in Paris, the multilingual literary war newspaper Der Mistral in 1915 in Zurich, the Horizont Hefte in 1920s, and had been a regular contributor, among others, to Die Aktion, Das Kunstblatt, and Der Querschnitt in the 1920s Berlin. But what is more important from our perspective and the perspective of Die Zone's cultural policy agenda is that as early as 1913, he was involved in a Franco-German Institute for Reconciliation. I am going to quote his own account of the initiative in a Hungarian journal during First World War, which was actually mentioned by Esther in connection with the critics on Baudelaire and Verlaine. So it was a conservative newspaper. He said, in the first days of 1930, I got a letter from a friend of mine from Alsace, a French native, informing me that she would like me to participate in the foundation of a Franco-German association. The aim of the association would be to prevent the escalation of the French-German conflict, which was becoming increasingly heated, by holding events celebrating the mutual sympathy between the two nations in both Germany and in France, creating German schools in France and French schools in Germany, and cultivating the good relations which were in danger by organizing joint art exhibitions, literary meetings, and lectures. The committee, which was soon formed, had 8 members, among others Ernst Haeckel, Maurice Maeterlinck, Blaise Cendrars, and Herwart Waldam, as you can see in the list of members here. For propaganda purposes, the following newspapers were at the disposal of the committee: Les Hommes de Jour, a French-German journal I edited, namely Les Hommes Nouveaux, Der Sturm, and Le Mouvement Pacifiste, also highlighted here. The Institute did run school exchange programs and launched a short-lived magazine in which Szittya was not featured, so this enterprise left here. But before we examine Die Zone and whether the chief editor Emil Szittya could mobilize and channel the extensive network he had built in the context of the international avant-garde, it is worth exploring how he was perceived by those he interacted with, collaborated with, or targeted as audience in Paris. He first appeared on the map of the Sûreté Générale, that is the French foreign police, as a German anarchist in 1910, as his surveillance file shows here. However, he was not German. He was born as a Hungarian-speaking Jew in what is now Budapest. He learned German only during his youthful vagrant years, but wrote all his literary and cultural history books in German until the 1930s, when he began to publish in also French. As his residence permit shows here, he did not acquire either German or French nationality and remained in France as a Hungarian citizen until his death in 1964. Viewed through this lens, the aforementioned motto of Die Zone, that it was not an immigrant newspaper, but a platform for free thinkers, acquires another layer of meaning. The journal, therefore, was not intending to represent the German immigrant community, but the genuine, independent German culture whose representatives were not necessarily born and bred Germans. Die Zone was therefore the brainchild of Szittya. On the one hand, he was inspired as a free thinker by a sense of commitment and responsibility to German culture, but these were not separable from his personal motivations, as his diary here testifies. He wrote in January 1933, first day of the European Revolution, Hitler has become Reich Chancellor. Then, what will become my wife and my child if war breaks out? And on February 2nd, Hitler dissolves the Reichstag. Will he be the future Napoleon? In contrast, therefore, to his unsuspecting attitude in 1913, when they didn't waited for the war, in 1933, Szittya was aware of the threat of the war and of the stalemate that it would mean for his family and his German-born wife. She could not return to Germany with a Hungarian Jewish husband, and meanwhile, they would have to fear internment in France. And he was absolutely right. The November 1938 law on surveillance and control of foreign residents defined the category of undesirable foreigners as those whose resident permits were not in order and who did not have a properly signed working contract with a specific company. And Szittya fell into this category. And in the autumn of 1939, the internment started with a scope that widened progressively, and Szittya soon had to hide. Let's see now the structure of the journal launched by Szittya. It is quite close to the structure of the Berlin-based art quarterly magazine Die Querschnitt, in which Szittya had been featured on several occasions, but overall, Die Zone was much more political. Both periodicals published poetry, prose fiction in sequels, such as the second novel of Paul Rustadt, entitled England, exhibition reviews, and scientific, mainly social science articles, notably on whether there is Jewish blood, biologically speaking, or on the increasing number of suicides in the Third Reich. The main profile of Die Zone was, however, political, with editorials on the collaboration of the German Catholic and Protestant Church, or on the selfish individualism which hindered the left-wing parties in Germany standing united against the Nazis. Beyond the overview of the content, a glance at the advertising section of the newspaper provides important information about its distribution, audience, and professional network. Publications brought out under the auspices of the magazine, as well as the editor's own books, are of course prominently featured in the ads section, as you can see here. But moreover, we see ads that testify to the intention to create a Franco-German community, or to at least provide a space for personal initiatives, such as that of the intelligent French woman who would like to go on a trip to the Rhine with a German girl and having a language exchange. We also have the typical job seeker advertisement of a 32-year-old German Jewish immigrant salesperson with relevant knowledge of the textile industry who was looking for a position of any kind. This category of ads testifies to the intensifying German immigration. Szittya's anarchist connections also appear in the form of advertisement for an Austrian anarchist journal and publishing house, Knowledge and Liberation, and also FIBA Verlag, for its part, which published Jewish-themed books in addition to travel guides and music publications in Vienna. The various commercial ads, on the other hand, absolutely paint a picture of a locally focused newspaper that is specifically trying to cater to an artistic community. Top left, Wacker and Bondi are involved in the transport and the packaging of artifacts. Top right, Mr. Ifenker offers furnished and unfurnished studios to artists. Bottom left, a certain Joseph Hecht tries to sell his engravings depicting famous Parisian sites. Bottom right, the famous artist cafe, Café du Dôme, where a copy of Die Zone could probably be found and read. The addresses, Montrouge, Cité-Faguière, Montparnasse, are all within a radius of about 5 kilometers, and they were clearly identified by the press and in the vernacular with a mainly émigré artistic community. These communities' derogatory nicknames were, among others, Métèques, meaning undesirable outsiders, or the Central Powers of Montparnasse, referring to the citizens of the Central Powers during the First World War, namely Germans, Austrians, and Hungarians. Therefore, it can be safely said that if a Germanophone French reader had opened Die Zone, he would have clearly known where to put it. He would have considered it as a newspaper of these Métèques, that of the Central Powers of Montparnasse. These antipathies were fueled by xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and the ill-targeted self-defense of people tormented by recession and unemployment after the stock market crash. And it is from this perspective that the second pillar of Die Zone's mission emerges: to promote a sort of program of integration for immigrants and to present them at the same time to the German-speaking French as deserving, as a group worthy of inclusion. Paul Rustad's text is a compact illustration of this from Die Zone, which goes as: "It is not yet possible to say whether the French way of life will survive the crisis. That this old-fashioned country, in its primitive way, has often done more to alleviate need than more developed countries, that it has retained its old generosity in dealing with foreigners, in helping artists and intellectuals, must be acknowledged even today. Over the past year, an influx of German immigrants has come to a city previously almost abandoned by foreigners. On Montparnasse and the Champs-Élysées, you can hear people speaking almost only German. A piece of Berlin now lives up here. Will Paris digest these new arrivals as it has digested Russians, Italians, and Spanish? Anyone who has lived in Paris for a long time now sometimes wishes that new arrivals were advised to respect French more and to fit in where, in fact, to fit in where tact, not business, dictates. At the same time as emigration, the poison of Hitler's propaganda is beginning to penetrate France. Let us hope that France will be immune to any outside influence." But not surprisingly, Die Zone has not attracted much attention from the French public. I did not find mention of Die Zone in more mainstream press, but I succeeded to find only one, but fairly longer review of one of Szittya's writings, an essay on the French landscape painting, in which he ultimately defends the foreign painters' presence in the French art institutions and in the French society. The critic's Michel Puy reaction is telling, even from the perspective that we have just seen as Paul Rustad articulating his program for German immigrants in France. And Michel Puy cites or quotes Szittya in the first phrase: "It is especially the French landscape itself and its fluid light of an incredible softness which gave substance to the greatness of French painting." This assertion seems to us to be full of consequences. The painters of Central Europe have only to rush to the sites of France to compose landscapes which will exceed those of French painters. The Nach Paris, to Paris, and it was the motto of the German army during the First World War, to be inspired by a less atrocious greed than in 1914, remains the watchword of our neighbors to the east. Of the 22 reproductions of paintings contained in Mr. Szittya's book, a dozen at most are signed with French names. Is it a coincidence that most of the others reveal German-sounding surnames to us? And all in all, we can see that Die Zone had to fight there for a true two-front struggle of cultural policy and implement a very complex program. It had to represent a genuine German culture against the Third Reich, which was the first resistance in my formulating, while at the same time offering an image of integrability and non-threat to the small part of the French society available for it, mainly intellectuals and a fraction of middle class with professions requiring language skills, so like German-speaking skills. And that will be the second resistance in my formulation. This program has hardly promised much success, and unfortunately, we do not have objective measures to estimate the potential, even the partial results. We have no way of estimating the readership or circulation of the paper, since not only have no subscription sheets or printing invoices survived, but the 7 issues had to be hunted down from different collections, since what was not destroyed during the occupation of Paris was destroyed by the French after the Second World War, at a time when the German language was understandably unpopular. So that was an attempt, however, at this kind of two-direction resistance, two-fronted resistance of a minority community. That were the Germans in Paris. Thank you.